Well, violence has broken out at a protest that we've been watching and following in Charlottesville, Virginia on Saturday. White nationalists have clashed with counter-protesters, are forcing the governor to declare a state of emergency. President Trump addressed the clashes on Twitter Saturday, saying, quote, "We all must be united and condemn all that hate stands for. There's no place for this kind of violence in America. Let's come together as one." Errol Barnett joins us now from Bridgewater, New Jersey. Errol, we haven't heard much from the president. It was a pretty late response that he issued. What are you hearing from the White House?
Well, this statement from President Trump, Rena, is the first from Mr. Trump that specifically addresses some of the unrest that's been seen in Charlottesville, Virginia today. But if you take a look online at some of the immediate responses and some of the calls from many Americans who've been watching the demonstrations and clashes with white nationalists and counter-protesters, many people have been calling for President Trump to speak up and speak louder, particularly because of some of the organizers and attendees who look to President Trump as really their champion. In fact, David Duke, who was a former Imperial Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, today at that rally said that this represents a turning point in the country. And he went on to say that this is why we voted for President Trump. So many Americans see the emboldened white nationalist movement. There were a number of people at a college campus late last night showing their faces, walking around with torches, who were proud to not just be pro-white, but anti-black, anti-Jewish, and anti-immigrant. If some of the footage you're seeing now is just from in the past few hours, where these demonstrators, some of whom were armed, wearing military fatigues, were essentially given free rein to walk about this Emancipation Park and spread their message of hatred. In fact, the message that we've seen President Trump tweet just a few minutes ago follows by 46 minutes a similar tweet by First Lady Melania Trump, in which she noted the freedom of speech but said that hate has no place in this country. And any of us who communicate on Twitter know that when you're sending a message, you use a hashtag to make it clear what you're discussing. The First Lady made sure to use hashtag Charlottesville, while in President Trump's message, where he says we all must be united and condemn all hate, stands for there is no place for this kind of violence in America. Let's come together as one. It's not specifically clear what type of violence he is speaking of. So critics of the president's lackluster response to these types of events and movements that the White House and President Trump have distanced themselves from, really critics feel like it hasn't been enough. Many of these white men feel that the Trump presidency represents something of a turning point, and other Americans want to see the president speak out more forcefully against not just the freedom of speech and ability for them to say what they wish, but the violence that comes along with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even House Speaker Paul Ryan tweeted out earlier, the views fueling the spectacle in Charlottesville are repugnant. It only serves to unite Americans against, let it only serve to unite Americans against this kind of vile bigotry. Any reaction from the White House as to why it took so long for the president to come forward on this?
Well, the president, while here in Bedminster, has had a very stacked agenda, mostly with issues relating to North Korea and national security, and they want to be very careful not to seem as if they are aligning themselves with hate groups or white nationalist organizations. I mean, it should be noted a strategist for President Trump, who we brought to the West Wing, who was part of the campaign, was Steve Bannon, who was an executive and ran the website Breitbart, which was itself a platform for alt-right and white nationalist viewpoints, anti-immigrant and anti-minority as well. In fact, many of the anti-hate group organizations that follow hate crimes have tracked a steady increase in reports of hate crimes throughout the country, whether it's against Hispanic Americans, Jewish Americans, or really anyone who is not a white American. They've pegged that to the Donald Trump candidacy and presidency. In fact, the rally that you're witnessing in Charlottesville today had been projected to be the largest white nationalist rally in the country in many years, if not over a decade. So there are those critics who feel that President Trump, because this group listens to him and feels that his policy have essentially spoken directly to their fears of being displaced and marginalized because of minorities and because of foreigners, critics feel that President Trump carries more responsibility as president of every American to forcefully tell these people this is not the type of way to communicate your message.
Errol, we know the president will head to New York and then Washington in the coming days. Do you get the sense from the White House that they intend to discuss this issue further, or do you think that they're just focused on North Korea and the other issues at hand right now?
Well, it's an open question. As I mentioned, they want to focus more on positives of the administration, successes both domestically and abroad. But today at 3 p.m., we do expect President Trump to hold a signing ceremony in front of the press where he may sign legislation as it relates to care for veterans. The press will be there, and we will make every attempt to ask President Trump his views of what's happened in Charlottesville. I mean, this all stems, all of this really opens old wounds for the United States. Although slavery was ended long ago, there have been racial divides for a long time, as well as prejudices. And the battle in places like Virginia are over the removal of Confederate statues. For a lot of Americans, they represent a positive heritage, while for other Americans, it really represents division. So President Trump will be asked about these things, but if history is any example, he will not want to belabor the point. He perhaps will say something very brief and move on. Sometimes he's expected that he can just say, stop it, for example, and it will end, when in reality, white nationalists have been emboldened by the Donald Trump presidency.
All right, Errol Barnett reporting from New Jersey. Thank you, Errol.
Sure.